the issue of the appropriateness of calling witnesses was addressed. Obviously, that is the most contentious part of one of these proceedings, and that'll be addressed at that time and not before the trial begins. With regard to getting the papers, it is a rule of impeachment in the Senate that we must receive the papers. It continues to be my hope that the Speaker will send them on over. The House argued that this was an emergency. They needed to act quickly, that the President was such, apparently, from their point of view, such a danger to the country that they needed to really rush this through. And then they sat on the papers now for 3 weeks. I hope that'll end this week. I understand there's considerable discomfort among Senate Democrats, some of them expressing that to some of you, over the continued delay in sending it on over. I wanted to touch on a couple of other things. There was some discussion in the last few days related to the Iraq episode that we're experiencing now, about the appropriateness of targets. I want to associate myself with the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State with regard to the appropriateness of cultural sites being targeted. That is not appropriate. As many of you have already written, and I've been pretty open about it, courting the Secretary of State to run for the U.S. Senate. He's made a decision that I think clearly under the circumstances is best for the country to continue to serve in that role. I think clearly under these circumstances he made the right decision. That should not, however, lead to any excess observations on the part of the other side that Kansas, which hasn't elected a Democratic senator since 1932, will do it in 2020.
We are all looking forward tomorrow to hearing from the administration about the situation in the Middle East, Iraq, and Iran. And I think that it's fair to say that irrespective of what people think about the geopolitics and some of the decisions and discussions there, that Soleimani was somebody who needed to be eliminated. And I make no mistake about it. He was a terrorist. He was responsible for killing hundreds of Americans and for terrorizing that region of the world for many, many years. And so we're anxious to hear about what the administration's process was in terms of that decision, and to hear about what perhaps may come next. With respect to impeachment, as the leader pointed out, the Senate is ready to do its job. We're just waiting for the House to send the articles, and I think the fact that they haven't says that this process is all about the politics of their base. What you're seeing Speaker Pelosi and Chuck Schumer do right now, I think, is basically play to their base and play political games. If there was such a sense of urgency surrounding this, obviously they would have sent it over here by now. But when they do, as the leader pointed out, Republicans are prepared to take it up and to follow the precedent that was set during the Clinton impeachment, which I think is a very fair process, which allows both sides to have their day in court, to make their arguments, for senators to ask questions, and then for any additional information to be voted upon. So I look forward to moving forward with that process, assuming again that the House decides to put aside the politics and to proceed with this process in a way that I think treats the President in a fair way and allows something that he didn't get from the House of Representatives, and that is a fair opportunity to defend himself.
Following up with what the leader has said with regard to impeachment, the Speaker of the House really has no role or leverage in impeachment in the Senate. What she has been doing over the last 3 weeks is completely partisan, all political, and as was just announced, we do have the 51 votes necessary to move forward using the Clinton model for impeachment. And the public is clearly with us in our positions there. Poll out this past weekend, a Harvard-Harris poll, 53% of Americans say that what Speaker Pelosi is doing is a political stunt. 56% say she's gone beyond her constitutional boundaries. 58% say send the articles. and 77% of Americans say accept the Clinton rules. That's where we are. 58% send the articles, national numbers, 77% accept the Clinton rules. Look, there's lots going on in the world. The world continues to be a dangerous place. There's important business that this Senate and this House need to do. We need to get on these things. It's time for Speaker Pelosi to get on with it or get out of the way.
Well, economic numbers have not been this good for a long time and may have never been any better for working families. The report at the end of the year that wage earners, the bottom 25% of wage earners in America, had the biggest increase in pay last year of any group and the biggest annual increase in a long time, something almost at the level of 5%. The top 25% of wage earners had pay increase a little less than 3%. So we're seeing the economy begin to equalize a little bit, a demanding workforce, paying the wages that people need to have to work in this kind of economy where people are having more vacancies than people looking for jobs. Unemployment, the lowest it's been in 50 years, and all the other economic indicators from the stock market to consumer confidence to holiday spending, all good, dramatically better than just a year ago, and even more dramatically better than 5 years ago. People need to be feeling good about the economy. Their spending habits, their investing habits seem to indicate that they are feeling good about the economy. It's easy to let that good news not be talked about at a time when we're focused on so many other things. But if you're a family at your kitchen table and you see this situation compared to the one you were in 2 or 3 years ago, you understand you're in a much better economy and your family is in a much better place.
Happy New Year, everybody. It's exciting to see the transition from 2019 on into 2020, and we certainly will have an exciting year. And over the holidays, while I was back home, people are excited about the new year and the fact that we do have a fresh start. And as I look at Congress with that fresh start, what we need to understand is we still have a lot of work to do for our constituents, the American people. And so we have had no delay. I am happy to report that things that matter to Iowans and Americans are already happening here in the Senate. This morning, our senior senator from Iowa and the chairman of the Finance Committee passed out of his committee the USMCA. This means a lot to folks back home. It means a lot to people all across the United States. And we are acting on it immediately. We're excited about that. We're also really excited that we now have a Phase 1 China deal, which hopefully will be signed next week. So while everybody is so focused on impeachment here, folks back home are telling me they are fed up. They want us to work on things that really matter to them. And that's what we're doing here in the Senate. I know the tides will turn maybe soon, maybe not. We don't know. Depends on Speaker Pelosi. But we are excited about the new year. 2020 is going to bring good things. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon and Happy New Year. There is indeed all sort of political argument going on right now, and I suppose that's understandable, but let that not obscure all the accomplishments that this Republican-controlled United States Senate has achieved over the last year or so. We've been able to sustain the longest period of economic expansion in American history. Wages are rising. We have gotten a lot of faithful constitutionalists, a record number, onto the federal bench. We've come to an agreement on USMCA. We've gotten a full repeal of the medical device tax, and we've given our troops the largest pay increase in a decade. And we're not done yet. That's what I want to emphasize. Hoosiers, like so many other Americans, want us to get substantive work done on the back end of some of the important near-term things we're dealing with. So my priorities moving forward are going to be to deal with lowering health care costs, making sure that housing is more affordable for rank-and-file Americans, that higher education is accessible to all Americans, that we actually pass that USMCA USMCA agreement that we've come to terms on. We made a great first step today in the Senate Finance Committee, and I was proud to cast my affirmative vote for that. And of course, we always want to keep the American people safe and secure, our most fundamental responsibilities. So these will be my priorities moving forward. I know the Republicans in the Senate are committed to getting the work of the American people done. Thanks so much.
Leader McConnell. Leader McConnell.
Yeah, let me just add one more thing before going to questions. The other day, I noticed some of the Gang of Eight complaining about not having prior notice of the strike. Let me remind everybody, I've been in the Gang of Eight during the Obama years. When Osama bin Laden was taken out, I was not told in advance. I was called by the vice president afterwards. My reaction to it was, congratulations, you did the right thing. And as Joe Lieberman pointed out in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, where's the applause? Where is the applause on the other side for the demise of one of the most heinous killers who ever stalked the earth? This guy was the worst of the worst. Where is the bipartisan applause for eliminating this threat? It's mind-boggling, and I do think it's interesting to compare the reaction to this, because there's a different occupant of the White House, to the reaction all the rest of us had when President Obama carried out an action very similar.
Leader
Yeah.
McConnell, thank you. Good afternoon. You talk about the Clinton arrangement, 100 to nothing. Isn't that the point, though, that something as important as impeachment, that all 100 senators agreed to something? You're suggesting here that you would implement something with 52, 53 votes, leaving the Democrats out in the cold here. Isn't that the idea that the Daschle-Lott agreement in 1999 got all 100 senators on the same page, and if you're going to go down the road of impeachment trial, that effort should be made in advance?
Well, I think I answered the question. That was,
but that's the idea.
well, that was impossible because they refused to treat President Trump the same way we treated President Clinton. What was good enough for President Clinton in an impeachment trial should have been good enough for President Trump. And all we're doing here is saying we're going to get started in exactly the same way that 100 senators agreed to 20 years ago. What's good for President Clinton is good for President Trump. We'll get around to the discussion of witnesses. We got around to the discussion of witnesses after we got through phase 1 20 years ago.
Senate Resolution 16 in 1999 had a provision for a motion to dismiss and motions on witnesses. Will that be included in the organizing resolution as it was in 99?
We're going to have a similar resolution. It may not be word for word exactly the same, but a similar resolution. And we'll be glad to show it to you when we unveil it.
Senator McConnell, you continually criticize the Democrats' impeachment case, saying you don't have enough evidence here. Does that mean that you believe that it was appropriate for the president to ask a foreign leader to investigate a political rival?
You're asking me to comment on the issue that's going to soon be before us. I've addressed that type of thing on the floor over the weeks, and I really don't have anything to add to it. Yeah.
You make clear that you will be considering witnesses at some point mid-trial, but can you promise now that there will be votes on witnesses?
The way it works when you're in an impeachment trial, at the risk of being redundant, is that 51 senators determine what we do. And there will be, I'm sure, intense discussion once you get past phase 1 about the whole witness issue. Everything, and by the way, the people who will be calling the witnesses will not be necessarily us. It will be the prosecution or the defense. And that's the way it's done, and admittedly, this is not like a typical trial because every juror would be disqualified. All of us would be disqualified if this were a regular judicial proceeding. But who is called as witnesses, typically you would expect to come from the prosecution and from the defense. Thanks a lot.
Senator McConnell, when are you going to vote on USMCA?
My question was, the Senate's going to come back.
Okay, cool.
have very different visions about what it means to conduct a fair trial. Democrats believe that a fair trial means that all the relevant facts come out and witnesses and documents are part of that trial. Who ever heard of a trial without witnesses and documents? It's unprecedented. But if you're afraid of the facts, if you're afraid of what would come out, if you want to cover it up, even in something as weighty and serious as impeachment, you say no witnesses and no documents. We say witnesses and documents, fair trial. No witnesses and no documents, cover up. That simple sentence describes it all. We always knew that Leader McConnell would not be for a fair trial. He said that from the beginning. He went on right-wing talk radio to brag about no fair trial and just listening to the White House. But many of his colleagues are very, very worried about going home and saying they're not for witnesses and documents. Large numbers of Republicans have refused to say whether they're for witnesses and documents. And that is why Leader McConnell came up with this kick the can down the road theory. Try to avoid that question. We are telling our Republican colleagues, you can run, but you can't hide. There will be votes on the 4 witnesses that we have asked for. There will be votes on the 3 sets of documents that we have requested. And there may be votes on other witnesses and documents as well. As we've seen over the last 2 weeks, the evidence for witnesses and documents keeps building. For somebody 90 minutes after the president's phone call to say, let's hush up what he did, says something. To say orders came directly from the president, from one of the witnesses we've requested, in a document that's been made public, says a lot. So we Democrats have the ability at an impeachment trial to get votes on whether there should be witnesses and documents. We've known for a while, I've said it in the last few weeks, McConnell will never go for it, but will 4 of his Republican colleagues. The eyes of America, the eyes of the Founding Fathers looking down upon us, are on our Republican colleagues. Will they stand for a fair trial? Will they stand for bringing evidence forward? Or will they be engaging in a cover-up in one of the most sacred and profound powers that the Founding Fathers gave the Senate? We will see. The next few weeks will be very, very telling. Senator Stabenow.
Thank you, Senator Schumer. As we know, the House voted to approve impeachment articles against Donald Trump, charging with abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Now it's up to the Senate to fulfill our responsibility, our constitutional responsibility, with a court of impeachment. Leader Schumer has proposed a full and fair bipartisan impeachment trial process that includes witnesses and documents. Pretty simple, pretty easy to understand, pretty common sense. This process will give President Trump every opportunity to bring forth evidence and make his case. Why doesn't he want to do that? The request for these witnesses and documents builds on a tremendous amount of evidence amassed by the House. And it's important to remember that the president chose to obstruct the House investigation, and he refused every opportunity to bring forward evidence and witnesses in his defense. Why? Since the House voted to impeach President Trump, new evidence has come to light, as we know, that shows why the Senate trial must include witnesses and documents. Democrats are simply asking for a fair trial. We are simply saying the House should give every opportunity to the president to come forward and give his side. If he has evidence, if he has witnesses that were there in the room, his top people, why doesn't he want them to come forward? We believe that a trial should have witnesses and documents. The real question is, what are the Republicans afraid of?
Senator Merkley.
A full and fair trial. What does that mean? I had the chance to go to 12 of my counties in Oregon and talk with citizens about that. I went deliberately to the most conservative counties in Oregon, find out how people were thinking about this. And what did they think? They thought, as any American, Democrat or Republican or rural or urban, a full and fair chance for those prosecuting the case to present their documents and their witnesses. A full and fair chance for those defending the defendant, the president, to present their case. And what else did they expect? They expected each of us who is going to take an oath to do impartial justice to actually do impartial justice, to put the country above the party, to reach a conclusion that would be the same if the president was of the opposite party. It isn't just the President of the United States that will be on trial. It is the Senate that will be on trial. It will be the system of checks and balances embedded in our Constitution that will be on trial. It will be all of us. And the test as to whether we can, in fact, do impartial justice, putting country ahead of party. So I think about those citizens. They know that a fair and full trial has documents and it has testimony. A cover-up in a kangaroo court does not. Let's honor the Constitution. Let's honor our responsibility and pass the test history has put before us.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you. Look, Senate Republicans have just plain run out of excuses for not calling witnesses and getting key documents in the Senate trial. Here's what Dr. Fiona Hill said under oath in the House of Representatives, that she was directed by John Bolton, quote, that I am not part of whatever drug deal Sondland and Mulvaney are cooking up, unquote. Now, John Bolton has said that if he gets a subpoena, he'll show up here. There will be no delay. And Senate Republicans are still going to tell us that we shouldn't call upon John Bolton to testify to what he described as a drug deal? I can't think of any other kind of trial where you wouldn't call that kind of key witnesses and ask for documents. And how about Mick Mulvaney, who John Bolton referred to? Well, on December 3rd, President Trump said, I want Mick to testify in the Senate trial, meaning Mick Mulvaney. So we have President Trump on record December 3rd saying he wants Mick Mulvaney to come testify here in the trial. We're asking Senate Republicans to call Mick Mulvaney, just as President Trump has said he will. Now, we have heard from Senator McConnell that the big difference, that this is the same as the Clinton proceeding. As Senator Schumer has said previously, there's a huge difference between where we are right now and the Clinton trial. Specifically, all the witnesses that were requested to testify in the Senate trial had already given testimony under oath, under penalty of perjury, in previous related proceedings, whereas the witnesses that we have called for have not given any testimony. But I did hear Senator McConnell still want to stick to the Clinton model, and I think we all want to remind him that under the Clinton model, at the end of the day, there were witnesses. There were witnesses. So if we're going to stick in the long run to the Clinton model, not just the short run, then by God, our Republican colleagues better join us in asking for these key witnesses and key documents, or they will be complicit in a cover-up, and they will be complicit in rigging a trial and violating their constitutional responsibilities.
Okay. Questions? Yes. Yes.
Now that Republicans have the votes, is it time for the Speaker to go ahead and send over the articles of impeachment?
Well, let me say, the Speaker has said all along that she wanted to see the arena in which she was playing when it came to a trial so she could appoint impeachment managers. Now it's becoming clear that Mitch McConnell wants to do everything he can to avoid a fair trial, so she has some idea of what's happened. But let me say this. By not sending the articles immediately, she's already accomplished two things which we fully support. One, Mitch McConnell couldn't do what some thought he might want to do. Right before Christmas or after Christmas, just dismiss. And second, in the last 2 weeks, there's been a cascade of evidence that bolsters the case, strongly bolsters the case for witnesses and documents. So now we have a greater feel for where we're headed. And Speaker Pelosi, I have a great faith in the decision that she will make. But she's accomplished a great deal already. And if you doubt that, ask any one of the Republicans. Not whether they'd support the kick the can down the road, not whether they'd support the duck, but whether they'd support witnesses and documents. They're afraid to say yes because they know Donald Trump will be furious at them. They're afraid to say no because they know their voters, their constituents would be furious at them. They're stuck. We will not let them avoid the vote. They can delay it. They can't avoid it.
So is there any other reason right now for her to withhold the articles?
Well, I've said what I've said about Speaker Pelosi. I think she's done a very, very good job, and it's helped our case. And let me just say, I am not only hopeful, but I think there's a pretty decent chance that we're going to get enough Republicans to vote for witnesses and documents during this trial.
So are you prepared to work with Mitch McConnell on a framework, even if he proceeds the way he said he's going to, without witnesses and documents?
No, if there's no witnesses and documents, we will have the ability at the beginning of the trial and as we go through it to get votes, and we're going to get them. McConnell will not allow any votes. I've asked him 3 times now. What about witnesses, documents? He's rejected it. So I don't see, when he's so intransigent against a fair trial, when he is so embracing covering up evidence, we have to move forward and do what the Constitution commands, which is a fair trial with witnesses and documents.
Senator Schumer, you just expressed optimism that some Republicans would vote for witnesses. Have they told you that in conversation?
I'm not talking about any conversations I've had. I do know where public sentiment is. I do know where fairness is. And I also know when it's the weight of the Constitution, it weighs on shoulders in many different ways than in a normal type proceeding where people would just go along with Trump. Admittedly, they're afraid of him. Taylor.
So your first vote as a United States Senator was to vote for a resolution comparable to the one you're going to see later this week. You subsequently voted against summoning witnesses for the trial. Why shouldn't we conclude that the reason for your change of heart here in the current circumstances based on the fact
Very simple. Every trial has had, you can't draw the analogy, particularly with me, because I am a historical footnote. I was already a prosecutor who saw the whole case, because I was in the House. Yes.
As far as the war powers resolution is concerned and limiting the president's power, during the Obama administration, there were around 571 drone strikes. Why limit the president's power now simply because the
Constitution gives the Congress the power to make war for a very good reason. If you read the Federalist Papers, if you read your history, one of the things they were most afraid of was a president, a chief executive, who would grab too much power and rush to go to war. And the bottom line is very simple. This president's foreign policy, I describe it in 2 words: erratic and just wrong. He's erratic and he's impulsive. I describe it in 2 words: erratic and impulsive. If you look at every foreign policy endeavor this man has been involved in, we're worse off. North Korea, photo ops, nice little love letters. North Korea now, it looks like, has an ICBM and many more nuclear weapons. Syria, we're in much weaker shape in Syria than we've been before. Russia, every time he's confronted Putin, Putin has cleaned his clock. So this president, when it comes to these kinds of things, doesn't have strategy. And I am worried that he will either, by impulse action or just lack of strategy, bumble us into war. Congress must be a check on that. The Founding Fathers gave us that power. We will do everything we can to exert it. Thank you, everybody.